Almighty Father in heaven, in the name of your Son, our glorious and victorious Savior, Jesus Christ, we humbly ask for your blessing upon our worship of you on this, your holy and sanctified Sabbath day, so that we may grow more in our knowledge of you, our love for you, and our obedience to you. And he told them a parable. Look at the fig tree and all the trees. As soon as they come out in leaf, you see for yourselves and know that the summer is already near. So also, when you see these things taking place, you know that the kingdom of God is near. Truly I say to you, this generation will not pass away till all has taken place. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will not pass away. Amen. Okay. If you've been a reader of Daily Bible Study, Daily Bible Study website for a while, you know that we added a news page a few months ago, and it proved to be one of the most popular pages on the entire website. It was actually running number 2 or number 3. Actually, it was approaching the point where it actually could become, and still could, the number 1 page of the website, which is not exactly what we were trying to do, although it provides linkage back, so it does benefit the website, how the World Wide Web works. But the way it was originally set up was that we would put news links on the news page, news headlines, breaking news headlines, and people could either go just read the headlines, as many did, because many people don't have the time. There were quite a collection of them. Actually, I left them on usually for about a week. So the entire page was about 100K, somewhere in there. So there were a few hundred links on there. So it would take quite a while to read them all. But inevitably, every day, usually, I would get a complaint from somebody because of a particular news link that was on the news page. You know, as if I made the news or I wrote the news, and I didn't. It was based upon I don't make the news. You know, I don't have any control of what's going on in the world, and I don't write the news stories for CNN or BBC or CBC or all the various news agencies from which links were put on that news page. But nevertheless, people would get angry because I put a particular link on. They just didn't want people to read what was going on, and you know, some people got pretty upset about it. You know, as if it was my fault what's going on in the world, and it's not. But some accused me of putting a particular link on for a particular reason, and they're quite right. I usually did. There was usually a link put on there, every single one of them, for a reason, and that's to help people come to know things that are going on. The health section was usually if there was a health alert of some sort of recall, or where there was like spinach. Those of us who were vegetarians thought we were pretty much safe, but then of course everything we're hearing now, people getting deathly ill. I think some people actually died, did they not, from that tainted spinach last year. So no one is safe, and whenever there's something like that, we would put it on the health page, in the health section of the news page. And the technology section, of course, if you're in the internet world, as most of you are, then a virus outbreak or a technical situation that you should know about, or things that are going on in the weather, or whatever, that was put on for a purpose. And the news links were as well, even though it seems, depending on your political persuasion, some people didn't like what was put on. And as I said, I don't make the news, but the news links were chosen. I admit it. I confess they were put on for a reason, even though some people didn't like them. But I changed the page about a week ago, that instead of putting links on, headline links on, I just simply put the sources. There were, I think, 50 or so of the various world news agencies in which those same stories were found. And some people like that, they could go and get it themselves. Well, other people didn't, because they wanted to have us put the links on for them. They were amazed that we were able to find them all, and sometimes it is amazing, but we had some help. Some of them I found just on my own morning and evening news that I do on the internet now mostly. I still have a subscription to the local newspaper, but oftentimes there will be a week or 10 days of them sitting there, and they just never get read. And then I'll suddenly get the urge to read them, and I'll be there for an hour or so skimming through the big old paper newspaper. It's a hard thing to get used to after a while, after you haven't do it anymore, wrestling with these big sheets of the traditional newspaper, because they do everything from the internet now. But either way, I would end up getting a blast from somebody, either because I was accused of selecting news links for a particular reason, and I did. It's true, I did select them for a reason, and so people could be aware of what's going on. And on the other hand, when I just had the news links to the various agencies, people didn't like that because I wasn't selecting them. But it was just a matter. I changed it to just the news agencies. That went on for I think we ran that for about a week or 10 days or 2 weeks, whatever it was, just to see what the reaction would be. And it's been overwhelmingly people liked it the other way. So we brought that back now, just in the last 24 hours. And it'll take a few days for it to build up again to the number of links, because, as I said, I left them on usually for about a week, and so it'll take a week to get the whole page worth. But that's back on now, so we have more happy people in one way. But I'm sure then it'll start again now, where people will give me a blast once in a while for putting on a particular news link that they don't like. But as I said, I don't make the news, and I don't write for the BBC or the CBC or CBS or NBC or ABC, whether the American one or the Australian one or anybody else. I don't make the news. But the question is, why put a news page on a daily Bible study website? That's a reasonable question, isn't it? And although if you understand how the internet works, it does have a benefit toward readership, but it also has a benefit for your Christianity, which is the reason actually I put it on there. It was a service to our readers, but there were also, the main reason is that Christ told us to watch things that are coming. Matthew 24. With actually a heads-up warning to watch what's going on in the world, because it may well be that we are the generation that's going to witness in person the things that Christ described there, either in Matthew 24 or in the book of Revelation. I can give you one example. We'll get to this. I've actually took a few just from this week's news that are directly from the Bible, directly related to things that are coming in the Bible and that made news today. But it's also very important to people to realize, and it doesn't matter where you are around the world, it's not about nationalism. That's part of the reason, part of the defense of freedom, is to understand what's going on. And to truly understand what's going on, never mind the propaganda, because most people, when they hear the word propaganda, you think of something that during the Cold War, of course, the Soviet Union had their own news agencies and to propagate their points of view, the government points of view, and they were just spoon-feeding this stuff to their people. And, of course, that became very famous, a perspective of that, but without realizing, we were doing the same thing on this side. Very same thing. Perhaps not as much the government doing it, although they certainly did in the West, in the Western nations, but it just is a matter of our own perspective. The people who produce our news are patriotic to their own nations, and they're not going to put something, usually, that is detrimental to that point of view, or to the point of view in the way that people are brought up. So a particular news of a particular country is propaganda. It can't help but be propaganda, and sometimes people just can't see. It can be innocent propaganda. It's not even deliberate. But the news sort of becomes, instead of a window, and I think I did a study about this a few years ago, how the news becomes, rather than a window on the world, but just rather instead just a reflection, like a mirror of yourself. You don't really see the world as it is. You see the world as through your own eyes and through your own perspective and through your own way of seeing things, even though to the rest of the world it makes no sense at all. It's amazing how you can read about events, the very same event that may happen even in your own country, wherever that is. Read it in your own news media from your own country, and read it in the news media from somewhere else. And I'm not talking about other countries that are your enemies. I'm talking about even your friends. Just read about it, and you'll oftentimes learn things that you would never have even read about from your own news media. And I'm not saying there's anything sinister about it. It's just that perspective thing, how people will use the news. And some news agencies certainly have a perspective on things. Not only a nationalistic perspective of something, but a particular political party within that nation. I'll use Fox News as an example. The Fox News is the Republican news agency of the United States. Is that an extreme statement? Well, I'm not the one who originally said it. Someone wrote to me and said that to me, and I agree. I think it is. But there are liberal news agencies there as well. And in this country here in Canada, certainly we have, when the elections happen, you can tell which newspapers are for the Conservatives, and you can tell which newspapers are for the Liberals. And their news reflects that through the year, everything from their political cartoons to everything else, to the perspective of how they report certain things or don't report certain things. And it's amazing too, you can read about our own news here, read about it, what is written about an event that happens here, read about it in Britain, what is written in the BBC, what a writer from the BBC will write about something that's happened here, and you'll learn something, probably. And I would say probably, I couldn't use the United States as an example there, because very little Canadian news ever finds its way in the U.S. news media. Very little. It's amazing. It's almost like we're not here. And that can be a good thing, too, in a way. It's just when we do something that makes people mad that we make the news. But it's an amazing perspective of how things are viewed in a particular way that leaves people unable to see a wider picture. It's like, the new. I was going to check this. I didn't have time to do it this morning. But the word news, N-E-W-S, can be viewed as the 4 different compass points: north, east, west, south. That's a good way of putting it. I don't think that's the actual origin of the word, but think about it. If you want really a full view, then look in all directions. It's like, how long would you survive if you cross the street by only looking in one direction? How long would you last? You're going to get blindsided, aren't you? And it's the same in the news. You will read things about yourself that you may not just know, and about your own political situation that you may not know. And also, in other things in the news that you will find, this example here, action plan for killer asteroids. That sounds like something, very science fiction out of a science fiction movie. This is going to happen. I will read this, and I have some others, but we'll get to this one. This is straight out of the Bible, what they're planning for here. Action plan for killer asteroids. A draft UN treaty to determine what would have to be done if a giant asteroid was on a collision course with Earth is to be drawn up this year. And I'll read this one in its entirety. And they're going to try. It's a good idea that they're going to try to do that, because according to the book of Revelation, there's one coming. And unfortunately, they're not going to stop it, because it is going to collide. But this is something straight out of the news. You can look at the news, and you can look at the Bible, and see a lot of other things. The European Union, the development of what's going on there, is being ignored, practically ignored on this side of the Atlantic. Practically ignored. Most people don't even know what a European Union is. They have no idea. And so many other things that are just there. What the work being done at the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. And who sooner or later they're going to find something that's going to set off a religious frenzy in Israel. And I think they're going, and by that I mean I think they're going to find the Ark of the Covenant. I think it's under that Temple Mount somewhere, and sooner or later somebody's going to find it. And imagine if they did. Imagine if they did. We'll get to a couple of those stories as well. But it's important to read what's going on as Christians, because there's a tremendous deception coming, political and religious, because the beast that we read of in Revelation 13 is very much political, and he's going to get much of his political power from religious deception. And isn't that amazing? Or perhaps not, because it is amazing then, or will be then, because never have those miracles happened to the degree satanic miracles happen, but they've never happened yet, as described in Revelation 13. But that unity, those two people, have happened many, many times. Many, many times. And you can look at these things in the news, today's news, literally today's news, and look at the Bible and see it coming, and understand why it's coming. Whereas if you only read your local news or your local national news, you probably would miss it. And sometimes, you missing something may only result in it colliding with you if you miss it. It's not going to miss you. You're going to get literally blindsided. It's very, very important to do that. But I thought I should mention about that news page, there is no political motive there. It is simply there as a service to this ministry. Ministry itself means service, but it has that point that much of prophecy is yet to happen. Most of the prophecy in the Word of God is yet to happen. Most people don't realize that, but it's true. Much of what is described in the book of Daniel, way back there in the Old Testament, hasn't happened yet. Certainly the book of Revelation, not yet. And there's a lot in there. All the heavenly signs. The asteroid is just one of them. There are many other things. So it's about the news, but it's about the Bible. So you see how the connection is made there and why it's made there. And certainly Revelation or Matthew 24 is about news, entirely about news. That's a newscast or a summary of newscasts that are coming, that you're going to be able to turn on your TV or your internet on your computer now, because that looks like where the technology is headed. It's all going to be internet, and see it happening. Christ's words actually happening on your TV screen or your computer screen. It's coming. It really is. And a lot of those things are going to bamboozle a lot of people. They're not going to understand. Mainly because they're only going to be reacting to events that they don't know are coming, whereas, for example, we do know they're coming. We don't know every detail. Not every detail was provided for us, and perhaps every little detail wasn't determined. There's that flexibility there to happen. But we know the broad outline. Matthew 24 is an excellent example of the news that is coming upon this world. And we will cover that as well, just as a quick review, because it's about things that are even happening today, but not in their ultimate fulfillment, as was described there, because in their ultimate fulfillment, or in their greatest intensity, Christ was talking about the time just prior to his return, the literal return, within the few years up to that point. But you can read things. This asteroid article here, I did a printout of it. This is straight out of the book of Revelation. So you see the connection, how the Bible is real. All those people in the Bible were real. All the places were real. Those prophecies are real. And as I said, most of them are yet to happen. We may be the generation of man, of humanity, generation being all of those living, young or old, to see it all happen. Some may survive right to the point of Christ's return, although they'll be changed as well. So today let's have a look at the news according to the Bible perspective, because if you use that as your basis, as your compass, you will be able to look in all directions and understand it, and nobody's going to blindside you for any reason. You'll be able to see through all the hocus pocus and all the propaganda and all the spin and see it for exactly what's going on and exactly why and exactly who's behind it. Just a few examples. But first let's begin Matthew 24. And just as we go through this, consider how much of it is happening today or beginning to happen today. Because you just might watch this happening on your daily news. You might be an actual eyewitness of what Jesus of Nazareth was describing in prophecy. Because somebody's going to, sooner or later, that last generation, that last population of humanity, young or old, that last generation, are going to witness it. And it could be you. So that may be a different way of looking at Matthew 24, but that's really what Jesus was doing, was describing it for that last generation. He knew very well that it was not going to be them, even though they experienced some of those things, just as God's people have experienced it throughout time, to a degree, to some point. And for many of them, the persecutions and the tribulation and the martyrdom happened in the most horrendous ways. Untrue Christians were martyring each other as well. And I don't mean that as a put down or an insult, because they were killed just as horribly as true Christians were. But from the perspective of God's true people, what is described there has been happening to them right through time, right from the very beginning. But the last generation is going to be the news. You're going to see it on your daily news. You're going to read about it on your daily news. And you know from that something that the vast majority of people are either not going to know or who are going to simply be unaware of by choice. Because a lot of the people who are going to be persecuting God's true people are people who are going to be thinking that they're Christians. And people who hold may well be holding a Bible in their hand while they're doing it, just as had been the case, again, through history. People who thought they were Christian. You look at the martyrdom of people who claim to be Christian doing horrendous things to other Christians and thinking that they're doing God a service, as it's just plainly also described there. They're not evil in their own minds, even though they are doing evil, because certainly they are not doing something that Christ told his people to do. Christ never told his people to go out and martyr anybody, did he? And yet a lot of Christian professing people have been doing just that for a very long time. But Matthew 24, from the perspective of the news, consider it that way and be ready, because, as I said, you may well be among those who actually witness it in real time. Matthew 24, and I'm just using this because it's one of the chapters of prophecy that is very much together all in one place. These prophecies are found in other places, and certainly the prophecies are found throughout the entire Holy Bible, Old Testament, New Testament. Most prophecy hasn't happened yet. That includes the Old Testament. But Matthew 24 is a very well put together picture of all that's coming in the time prior to his return. Matthew 24. Jesus left the temple and was going away when his disciples came to point out to him the buildings of the temple. But he answered them, "You see all these, do you not? Truly I say to you, there will not be left here one stone upon another that will not be thrown down." And of course that happened to a large degree, just to insert there, when Jerusalem was destroyed, 70 AD, the Romans came. Although some of those stones, if you consider the Wailing Wall, the Western Wall, they're still there. So all of them aren't down yet. Where he plainly said there, "Truly I say to you, there will not be left here one stone upon the other." And right now there's still one upon the other. There certainly are there. Continuing, as he sat on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately, saying, "Tell us, when will this be? And what will be the sign of your coming and of the close of the age?" Jesus answered them, "Take heed that no one leads you astray." And he was talking, if you're that last generation, as much to you as to them, because he knew it was not going to be them, even though they faced, as I said, the very same persecutions, and for many of them they were actually put to death. "For many will come in my name, saying, I am the Christ, and they will lead many astray." Now what does he mean by that? That they themselves will claim to be Christ? Well, in some cases it's true. You see some of those in the news once in a while too, people claiming to be Jesus Christ. But moreover, it's people who say that Jesus is the Christ. You know, the Pope says that Jesus is the Christ, and all of the people who, all of those daughter churches, they're all going to say that Jesus was the Christ. They're not denying that, but they've been persecuting true Christians, just as we're being warned here. So you see what I mean? It's not the people who don't know. The greatest threats to Christians in the time prior to Christ's return isn't going to be the Muslims. They're considered as the great threat now, even though they certainly are to some degree, but actually that's more political than religious if you really get down to it. But the greatest threat to true Christians is people who think they're Christian. Continuing, "And you will hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that you are not alarmed, for this must take place, but the end is not yet." And certainly that's going on now throughout the human experience, human history. And again, even to this very day, we have wars and rumors of wars. You know, we've got the war in Iraq and the war in Afghanistan, and perhaps another one coming in Iran. Who knows what's going to happen there? Continuing, "For nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, and there will be famines and earthquakes in various places." And of course, those are happening slightly. We're all waiting for the big one, depending on where you live. If you're someone in California, you certainly understand what the big one there means. But if you're in Israel, the big one there is going to be as much damage. And we read of it in prophecy, how the Mount of Olives is going to be split. And we've covered this in other sermons and studies, how the whole Jordan Valley exists because it's an earthquake fault. You know, you've heard of the San Andreas fault system in Southern California. Well, the Jordan Valley is the very same sort of thing. The Jordan Valley is an earthquake fault. If you look at a map of the Middle East, you can see how plate tectonics, the spreading, has happened there, and why, for example, the Sinai looks the way it does. You know, all those pieces of the puzzle They fit together very nicely because they've been spreading for quite a while, and the earthquakes that are coming, and the famines. Famines will be part of the four horsemen of the apocalypse. Part of that, of those famines, will be caused by the destruction caused by war. If you destroy the infrastructure of a country or of an area, a large area, people are going to go hungry. Never mind the fact that things like stores won't be open, but just there'll be nothing produced. You cannot produce crops in a war zone. All this is but the beginning of the birth pangs, so you can see how the thing will be progressive and how destruction can lead to further destruction, because now comes religious persecution. Then they will deliver you up to tribulation and put you to death, and you will be hated by all nations for my name's sake. Now, isn't that an interesting statement? You will be hated by all nations for Christ's name's sake. Now, isn't that amazing? Why would that be? Why should they? And then many will fall away and betray one another and hate one another. So the time of pressure will come, time of great trouble, and some aren't going to be able to withstand that pressure. They're going to fall away. They're going to become Catholics or Protestants, or actually Catholics, because there won't be any Protestants once the Pope's miracles start. And many false prophets will arise and lead many astray. And because wickedness is multiplied, most men's love will grow cold. But he who endures to the end will be saved. So you see there the news, how that's just a matter of how news is. You can turn that on and actually see glimpses of that in the news today already. And this gospel of the kingdom will be preached throughout the whole world as a testimony to all nations, and then the end will come. And that will almost certainly be carried out by the two witnesses, whose ministry will begin 3.5 years or 42 months prior to the return of Jesus Christ. They are the one time clue that we have of when Christ's return will happen. When their ministry begins, Christ's return will be 3.5 years away. We know, for example, that as of right this moment, Christ's return is at least 3.5 years away, because the ministry of the two witnesses has not happened yet. They might be ministers out there, that's possible, but the miraculous ministry, that 42-month ministry that they will have, has not yet begun. And when it does, final countdown to the return of Christ will be there from then on. Continuing, so when you see the desolating sacrilege spoken of by the prophet Daniel standing in the holy place, let the reader understand, then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let him who is on the housetop not go down to take what is in his house. And let him who is in the field not turn back to get his mantle. And alas for those who are with child, and for those who give suck in those days. Pray that your flight may not be in winter or on a Sabbath, for then there will be great tribulation, such as not been from the beginning of the world until now, no, and never will be. So you can see the time there it's describing, and again, typical refugee crisis, families, women with young children, caught out in the open, pray that it will not be in the winter. So you see how it's typical of how a refugee mass moves and starves and dies out in the open like that. And that's what he's describing. And we see parts of that or strangely enough, we're seeing a refugee crisis happening in Iraq right now. The infrastructure is destroyed. It's actually partly happening there now. Iraqi refugees flowing into other neighboring countries just to get away from the destruction. The infrastructure of Iraq is gone. Continuing, and if those days had not been shortened, no human being would be saved, but for the sake of the elect, those days will be shortened. Then if anyone says to you, Lo, here is the Christ, or there he is, do not believe it. For false Christs and false prophets will arise and show great signs and wonders, so as to lead astray, if possible, even the elect. And that's therefore very obviously talking about more than the great false prophet, the Pope. It shows there will be others out there. And certainly Satan is going to be enabling them to do those great signs and wonders, quote unquote, great false signs and wonders. Lo, I have told you beforehand. And that the you there is you, maybe, if you're in that time. If this is it, then that you is you. So if they say to you, Lo, he is in the wilderness, do not go out. If they say, Lo, he is in the inner rooms, do not believe it. For as the lightning comes from the east and shines as far as the west, so will be the coming of the Son of Man. Wherever the body is, there the eagles will be gathered together. Immediately after the tribulation of those days, the sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light, and the stars will fall from heaven, and the powers of the heavens will be shaken. And actually that is part of what we're going to read here, depending on how much time we have. Action plan for killer asteroids, why there's going to be darkness, and why the light is going to be blocked. We'll get to this one, which is from Revelation, but this is also talking of the same thing. Then will appear the sign of the Son of Man in heaven, and all the tribes of the earth will mourn, and they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. And he will send out his angels with a loud trumpet call, and they will gather his elect from the four winds, from one end of heaven to the other. From the fig tree learn its lesson. As soon as its branch becomes tender and puts forth its leaves, you know that summer is near. So also, when you see all these things, you know that he is near at the very gates. Truly I say to you, this generation will not pass away till all these things take place. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will not pass away. But of that day and hour no one knows, not even the angels of heaven, nor the Son, but the Father only. As were the days of Noah, so will be the coming of the Son of Man. For as in those days before the flood they were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage, until the day when Noah entered the ark. And they did not know until the flood came and swept them all away, so will be the coming of the Son of Man. Then 2 men will be in the field, one is taken and one is left. 2 women will be grinding at the mill, one is taken and one is left. Watch therefore, for you do not know on what day your Lord is coming. And that, of course, is used by the rapture people very often, one of the key so-called proof quotes of the rapture idea, and we've covered that in numerous other sermons and studies. Primarily what it is talking about is you don't know when you're going to die. And for you, if you die today, the return of Christ is happening for you from your perspective, because the dead don't know that they're dead, and the passage of time is not something that the dead are aware of or experience. Then instantly you will seem like the Christ has returned. For the Apostle Paul, from his perspective, even though he died nearly 2,000 years ago, the day of Christ's return has happened for him, because he will seem to have gone instantly from the moment of his death until Christ's return. Instantly, even though it hasn't happened yet. He's still in his grave waiting that resurrection. But know this, that if the householder had known in what part of the night the thief was coming, he would have watched and would not have left his house be broken into. Therefore you also must be ready, for the Son of Man is coming at an hour you do not expect. And that we just explained why that is. If you died this moment, the return of Christ has happened for you, from your perspective, that moment. And you don't know when. People could have a heart attack and die suddenly. You could be out driving and somebody could come over the hill on the wrong side of the road and kill you. Or things can happen. Or you can be killed instantly, and we don't know when that's going to come. But know this, if the householder had known in what part of the night the thief was coming, he would have watched and would not have let his house be broken into. Therefore you also must be ready, for the Son of Man is coming at an hour you do not expect. Who then is the faithful and wise servant, whom his master has set over his household, to give them their food at the proper time? Blessed is that servant, whom his master, when he comes, will find him so doing. Truly I say to you, he will set him over all his possessions. But if that wicked servant says to himself, my master is delayed, and begins to beat his fellow servants, and eats and drinks with the drunken, the master of that servant will come on a day when he does not expect him, at an hour he does not know, and will punish him, and put him with the hypocrites. There men will weep and gnash their teeth. So, a little bit of news there. And a lot of it is based on human nature, isn't it? As we said, it's been happening through time. But Christ's return is plainly described there. All the world will see him coming on the clouds of heaven. And so much of the news that is described there in summary It's covered in far greater detail in the book of Revelation, and how the sun will be blocked, the light from it will be blocked, and the moon will turn blood red. Again, that you can see that during eclipses sometimes, how the moon can seem to turn at least a very coppery, yellowish orange to sometimes a very blood red. And part of the reason in this particular case, this example, and we'll get to this, we can do this now about the asteroids, part of the reason, and amazingly, is a natural event. Part of the reason that's going to happen, the sun will turn to blood, is a natural event. And that is the reason why I brought this asteroid article from the BBC. Quote, Action Plan for Killer Asteroids. A draft UN treaty to determine what would have to be done if a giant asteroid was on a collision course with Earth is to be drawn up this year. The document would set out global policies, including who should be in charge of plans to deflect any object. It is the brainchild of the Association of Space Explorers, a professional body for astronauts and cosmonauts. At the moment, NASA is monitoring 127 near-Earth objects that have a possibility of hitting the Earth. And as we said, one of them is going to. Or, if not one of these, because new ones are being discovered all the time. By the way, there have been some that have just sort of missed us, and we didn't even see them coming. That has happened. Sometimes a couple moon distances away, they just sort of whizzed in and were gone. And that's the problem. Some of them you can't, if they're coming straight at you, you cannot be tracking them as well as if they were moving across the sky. The background of stars, you can track things, but the ones that are moving away from you across the sky, you don't have to worry about anyway, right? So you see how it's sort of a catch-22 there. When the ones coming straight at you are not as likely, they're not going to have that sideways motion that can be easily spotted. Continuing, the association has asked a group of scientists, lawyers, diplomats, and insurance experts to draw up the recommendations. And you can certainly understand why the insurance industry would be interested, although surely they have their loopholes, whether it be act of God, which is kind of ironic in this case. Continuing, the group will have its first meeting in Strasbourg in May this year. It is hoped that the final document will be presented to the UN in 2009. We believe there needs to be a decision process spelled out and adopted by the United Nations, says Dr. Russell Schweikart, one of the Apollo 9 astronauts and founder of the Association of Space Explorers. Known threat. The threat of an asteroid hitting the Earth is being taken more and more seriously as more and more NEOs, or near-Earth objects, are found. In the U.S., Congress has charged NASA with the task of starting a more detailed search for life-threatening space rocks. Congress has said that NASA's efforts to date are not sufficient to the threat, said the U.S. Space Agency's Dr. Stephen Chesley. They have changed NASA's targets so that the cataloging and tracking of asteroids is part of its mandate. Congress has asked the agency to mount a much more aggressive survey. At the moment, NASA tracks all objects greater than 700 meters, or 2,300 feet in diameter. The agency's new goal is to track all objects greater than 70 meters, or 230 feet in diameter. And considering even the smaller ones, considering the velocity of an impact, even something 70 meters across, 200 feet across, would put a pretty big hole in things. If it were to hit a city, it would practically have the same effect as a nuclear bomb. Continuing, to do this, the agency needs to use a new suite of telescopes. Alternatives include building a new NASA-owned system or investing in other proposed telescopes such as the Large Synoptic Survey Telescope or the Panoramic Survey Telescope and Rapid Response System, or PAN-STARRS. PAN-STARRS is a wide-field telescope being developed at the University of Hawaii, whilst the LSST is a proposed ground-based instrument being developed by the not-for-profit LSST Corporation based in the U.S. NASA estimates that there are about 20,000 potentially threatening asteroids yet to be discovered. So there's lots out there, and one of them is going to hit the Earth. We know that from the Word of God. Out of these thousands, I inserted that part. Continuing, out of those thousands, there will be without question many that look like they might hit the Earth, with a high enough probability that the public and everyone else will be concerned, said Dr. Schweikert. This has gone from being an esoteric statistical argument to talking about real events, added Dr. David Morrison, an astronomer at the NASA's Ames Research Center. Future plans. The UN Draft Treaty would establish who should be in charge in the event of an asteroid headed towards Earth, and who would pay for relief efforts and the policies that should be adopted. In addition, it would set out possible plans to deflect the object. Ideas could include hitting the asteroid with a spacecraft or rocket to deflect its orbit. Other less destructive proposals include a gravity tug that would simply hover over the asteroid and use gravity as a tow line to change its path. But any decision to deflect an NEO could come with its own set of conundrums for the UN, as changing its path may simply alter its final target. It's important to understand that when you start to deflect an asteroid, that certain countries are going to have to accept an increase in risk to their populations in order to take the risk to zero for everyone, said Dr. Schweikert. So to insert there's going to be the politics of it, and probably that's the reason the one that's going to hit us is going to hit us, because the chances of them getting everything together in time, considering how humans get along politically, doesn't seem likely. Continuing, it is difficult decisions like this, which can only be addressed by the UN, the Association of Space Explorers believes, and it is under no illusion that the process can be sorted out quickly. You have to act when things look like they're going to happen. If you wait until you know for certain, it's too late, said Dr. Schweikert. And he is a U.S. astronaut, or was. He's retired now, I think. Experts who will draw up the treaty include Lord Rees, the English Astronomer Royal and head of the Royal Society, the ex-director of science at the European Space Agency, Roger Bonnet, and former UK government advisor Sir Crispin Tickle. The proposals were outlined at the American Association for the Advancement of Science annual meeting in San Francisco. So it isn't just science fiction. It's going to, and we know for a fact that one is going to hit. Out of the 20,000 that they know of, it says here they know 20,000 that are known. There's lots of others up there. It will come in. They might have a very long orbit, very erratic orbit, and they're drawn to Earth by means of gravity. That's part of what brings them in. I mean, look at the moon. All the craters on the moon are caused by impacts. All the stuff that was left over from the creation, and there's a lot of it up there. Asteroids being the bigger parts, big old, where they really are, is just big rocks, and they are drawn in to larger objects as a means of gravity. And as I said, look at the moon. Look at what happened there. We are going to get hit. The Bible tells us that. And so let's have a look at that as the proof of what's going to happen when it does. And keep in mind that the earth is going to survive, and humanity is going to survive, and God's people are going to survive. So although it's going to be a major hit, it's not going to be the end of life. It's not going to be the end of the world. But it's going to be a major, major catastrophe. And actually, as it's found here, as a part of the seven angels who heard the seven trumpets, it is going to be actually a part of a series of things that come in from space. And as we read this, it almost sounds, if you want to take it that particular way, that the actual one about the main asteroid, I use that, I'll explain why I say the main asteroid, why it's described in that way. But here is found in Revelation 8:8, the second angel blew his trumpet, and something like a great mountain burning with fire was thrown into the sea. And this is describing things from heaven. And you know right away, if you have any experience with astronomy, done any reading, you know that it's talking about an asteroid. Because when they come in, they will be blazing because of the atmosphere the friction, the great heat, and mountains don't fall out of the sky. Mountains, not earthly mountains. So it's describing an asteroid very plainly. So there's going to be an asteroid strike. And good news, perhaps, is that it says here it was thrown into the sea. So it's going to miss land, obviously. But that doesn't mean that problem is solved. And whether or not it's talking about whether humans, whether these people that we just read about here in this article, managed to deflect it, at least partially, and that's what they're talking about, deflecting it, at least so it hits one part of the Earth or another, they might be successful. Amazingly, it never occurred to me until I read this, what they were talking about here, this particular article. That's the first time I've heard them put it that way, where they can deflect it so it hits one part, not hits one part of the Earth, but hits another. And it could be they managed to get the thing to hit the ocean. That may be what it's describing here. That's speculation, but and the sheer odds of it's the 70% of the Earth's surface is water, is ocean. So the odds are, just as a pure matter of chance, the odds are 7 in 10 that it will hit the water anyway, without anybody doing anything. But it's describing here, just consider what's talking to in the lead up to that great mountain before it strikes. Because it says here, the first angel blew his trumpet, and there followed hail and fire mixed with blood, which fell on the earth. And a third of the earth was burnt up, and a third of the trees were burned up, and all the green grass was burned up. Well, first of all, hail doesn't set fire. That kind of hail, does it? And it doesn't come in on fire. It just doesn't do that. Hail and fire mixed with blood, which fell on the earth. It doesn't say fell from the earth or within the earth's atmosphere. So whether they managed to deflect it or break it up a little bit, or whether there's going to be a lot of debris coming in with it, with that asteroid, whether this is speaking of the same thing. But it's an interesting how that relates to what's described here. Whether they've managed to deflect it and cause it to break up, and the pieces come in first before the major part of it comes in and strikes in the ocean rather than on land. And that's what this article was describing. So it's interesting how they might have done that. It could happen. And then it describes the asteroid coming in itself, something like a great mountain burning with fire, was thrown into the sea, and a third of the sea became blood, and a third of the living creatures in the sea died, and a third of the ships were destroyed. So you see there, although it's going to not be the end of the world and not be the end of life and not affecting salvation, it is going to be a major catastrophe, a major disaster. The ships destroyed, that makes sense, because there will be great tidal waves. Ships a great distance away could be capsized or sunk or swamped or whatever and damaged in that way. But notice again, continuing along with it, the third angel blew his trumpet, and a great star fell from heaven, blazing like a torch, and it fell on a third of the rivers and on the fountains of water. The name of the star is wormwood. A third of the waters became wormwood, and many men died of the water, because it was made bitter. And interesting again, stars don't fall. Stars are great distances away. They don't strike Earth, but pieces of debris or pieces of comet perhaps do. So a whole great mass of great population of rocks and debris and whatever are going to come in at that very same time. It's interesting how they would happen that way. The odds of being hit by an asteroid are really quite rare. So to have a whole series of things like that, if they're different, come in at practically the same time seems unlikely. It seemed more likely that one of them was broken up into pieces. And continue again, and again, speaking of strikes onto the water. So again, the waters, whether they managed to turn it, as this article says, that's just not my idea. It says here, they might be able to divert it enough to get it to strike a non-earthly or non-populated area. So that's just what was explained in this article. That's what they said. They said it, not me. And continuing, the fourth angel blew his trumpet, and a third of the sun was struck, and a third of the moon, and a third of the stars, so a third of their light was darkened, and a third of the day was kept from shining, and likewise a third of the night. And that just goes practically, as we mentioned, all the debris that will be shot into the sky, and even if it's a ocean strike, there's still going to be a great amount of material ejected up, a lot of steam, great tidal waves that will naturally do that. And I emphasize the word naturally. There's nothing miraculous about an asteroid strike. They've happened all the time. Look at the moon to see minor examples of that. And even the asteroids themselves, pictures that they have of them, done with telescopes and things, they've got dents in them where they've been running into each other. All these space rocks out there. So it's natural in a way, but it's going to be controlled by God, because obviously it's written here and it's part of those 7 angels doing it. So they've been aimed in that way. And whether humans are going to be able to stop it partially or try to, apparently they're going to try to, is yet to be seen. But it's coming. And that's the news. That's how one thing we won't have time for many others today, but it's just, you can see how they do plainly link one to the other. And what's described in this BBC article about the action plan for killer asteroids, it all fits. It's described plainly right there. Same thing. So that's the news. And it's also biblical prophecy. And you see how one is the other. They're just one and the same. There's no great discrepancy or difference there, other than that people are obviously not going to realize why it's happening, even though they may very well have read it in their Bibles, those who have read it. Here's another one as our time is running short again on us. This one will likely make, as they've read it, some people's hair stand straight up, simply because most people who are aware of it know that this is coming. And when you read it in the news, there it is. It's just an amazing thing. We've said this in studies and in sermons. Studies earlier, because the sermons have only been going for less than 2 years, but we've mentioned it in the sermons, certainly, and in the studies 10 years ago, that this is coming. And people of the Church of God have known it for a long, long time before that. Headline, poll, Israelis like and trust Germany. And isn't that, considering the history, how people forget what they say they should never forget. And there's a reason that history, the old saying, history repeats itself. This is the reason people forget. The lessons of history are not learned, because human nature doesn't change. So humans make the same mistakes. It may take a generation or two for them to do it, but it just keeps happening. But this is an amazing news article. It is directly related to many prophecies. It's related to the abomination of desolation. It is related to many other prophecies about Israel and the Roman Empire at the end, about Christ returning to destroy the great military beast power that will be there in Israel at that time. It's just an amazing article. This is something just straight out of the Bible. Straight out of the Bible. But it was written in the Jerusalem Post. Quote, Israelis hold a very favorable view of Germany, trust the country's leadership of the European Union, and would like to become members of the EU, according to a new study released by the Konrad Adenauer Foundation on Wednesday. Germany is seen in Israel as a reliable friend, commented Dr. Lars Hensel, director of the Konrad Adenauer Foundation in Israel. Given all the background and history, I'm happy about the clear picture that emerges from the numbers, he told the Jerusalem Post on Wednesday. According to the study conducted by the Kivrun Research in Jerusalem for the Konrad Adenauer Foundation, 67% of Israelis have a favorable view of Germany, and only 28% an unfavorable one, putting Germany behind only the United States at 85% favorable and Britain 80% favorable. While only 1/4 of Israelis are aware that Germany now holds the presidency of the European Union, 67% believe that it should play a greater role in the affairs of the Union. And that's an understatement considering what we know about prophecy. It's going to take a greater role, all right. It's going to rule the world. Whoever that end-time German, again, how many times have we mentioned that? And here it is, happening. Continuing, German Chancellor Angela Merkel is also seen in a favorable light, though she remains relatively unknown. Her approval was only 50%, but only 9% of Israelis reported any dislike for the Chancellor. The study also found that visiting Germany had a very strong positive influence on Israelis' perception of the country,
Among Israelis who visited Germany, 86% hold a favorable opinion of it, 19% higher than the average, and 82% had a favorable impression of Merkel. Even visiting the rest of Europe increased the favorability to 79%. I trust people's experience the most, German ambassador to Israel, Dr. Harold Kinderman, told the Post on Wednesday, saying the study demonstrated that experiencing Germany is much more worthwhile than formal declarations or statements. So aren't they just having a wonderful love fest there? And amazingly, it gets more amazing, and it's just a head shaker. For a lot of people, this is just would likely make, figuratively, at the very least, make their hair stand straight up. Continuing, for this reason, it was in Germany's interest to show the Israelis the actual modern Germany, with its responsibility for the Shoah and its close commitment to Israel. The favorability rating tilted heavily toward the elderly population, with the average of 67%. The level for Israelis over 51 years old was 80%. Merkel's approval rating, averaging 50%, rose to 77% among Israelis over 61 years of age. For me, this was one of the most important points of the study, commented Kinderman. It's important that we're not attracting the young people. Therefore, he said, his work focused on youth programs and exchanges for up to 30% of my time. Throughout the study, an intense Israeli dislike for France and French President Jacques Chirac was a recurring theme. France has the lowest approval rating of countries measured, 35%, and the highest disapproval rating, 61%. Chirac himself garnered an approval rating of merely 29%, with an unfavorable rating of 63%, surpassing the next in line, EU Foreign Policy Chief Xavier Solana, by 30 points. The dislike of France was not affected by visiting that country, the study found. While the average approval rating stood at 35%, the rating among those who visited rose by just 2 points to 37%. Despite the disparate views of the different countries, Israelis were strongly in favor of joining the European Union, according to the study. Fully 75% of Israelis said they supported the move, with 32% expressing strong support. A mere 18% oppose membership. And again, for some people, the alarm bells are just ringing in their heads when they read that. That is something straight out of Bible prophecy. Straight out of prophecy, as we've covered in so many other sermons and studies. This is just an amazing news report, and it's something straight out of the Bible. Continuing, according to Professor Amnon Rubinstein of the Interdisciplinary Center Herzliya, a longtime advocate of Israeli membership in the EU, this finding is not surprising and is compatible with previous polls. The one unifying stand above all other controversies and divisions is the wish of most Israelis to belong to Europe. I'll repeat that one. The wish of most Israelis to belong to Europe. Isn't that amazing? However, Rubinstein noted it takes two to tango, and Europe's attitudes make it impossible that Israel will join the EU. Well, there he's wrong. Absolutely wrong, because we know better than that one. And how is he going to ignore what's coming? He's not. Simple fact. Nevertheless, he believes closer links with Europe should be a means both for strengthening Israel and ushering in a new mood in the Middle East. And again, of course, much of that will be military. That great beast power will be a great military leader. And isn't that amazing how that all works out? So Israel will be secure. We won't have to worry about being attacked because it's going to have a big defender. A bigger defender than it has now. The study also found Israelis themselves to be strongly critical of the direction Israel was going, while indicating strong patriotic feeling. A surprising 77% of Israelis believe the country is headed in the wrong direction, with only 14% indicating the country was on the right path. At the same time, asked if they would leave Israel were they to receive EU membership, 84% would not, while only 11% would leave. And that's actually an irrelevant question, because in the European Union, people can travel freely, back and forth. It's not as though you're leaving if you go somewhere. It's like traveling from one province to another in Canada, or from one state to another in the U.S. It's not as though you're leaving, and you can freely go home or back and forth as often as you want. There's not. You don't have to go through an immigration process or all of that. You're already home. So it's just an amazing situation. That's all right there. The things that we read of in prophecy, in the Bible, and they're there on the news. And there's going to be a whole lot more. Matthew 24 was only a summary, actually, although it's one of the better ones. As I said, it brings things together very, very well. But you know, it's an amazing thing how many people don't even know about the European Union, who don't care, to put it bluntly. They care about their own little world within sight of their own horizon, and that's it. There are people like that all around the world. And that is really dangerous. Really, really, really dangerous, because things are going to be happening. It doesn't matter where on earth you are. It's going to affect you. That great beast power and the Pope's great miracles are going to affect everybody. Everybody. It's going to bring a lot of people into quote-unquote Christianity. It's going to bring the people of Judah into Christianity. Even though they're going to think that what they're doing is finally seeing that Messiah that they've been waiting for. And it's going to be a German. I very, very much believe that. Everything points in that direction. Everything. And the building of an end-time holy place or temple in Jerusalem, Christ warned, when you see the abomination of desolation, that those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. There's a very good reason he made that very specific statement. It means there is going to be a holy place in Jerusalem. And that means a temple of some sort, a physical temple that the people of Judah, it isn't necessary to Christians, we've gone through that in other sermons and studies, but to the people of Judah it most certainly is. And it is certainly a part of end-time prophecy prior to the return of Christ. God calls it an abomination of desolation of the holy place. So it's still holy to God, even though it is yet just, quote-unquote, a temple of the Jews, of the people of Judah, of the Jewish religion, of Judaism. And is that just speculation or guesswork, or is it something that's actually happening? Well, another one from the news. I did a printout of this one. It's in the news today. It's from the Eretz Sheva news service in Israel. Temple Mount reopened to Jews. Israeli excavation works at the Rambam Gate Ramp Wall Plaza to the Temple Mount evoked Arab rioting and criticism of Israel by Arab leaders, despite Israeli explanations and photos showing that the work had nothing to do with the Temple Mount. Arabs continue to accuse Israel of attempting to destroy the mosques at the site. The instigation came to a climax 12 days ago when dozens of Arabs and police were injured in rock-throwing clashes and rioting. Now that the calm has been restored in the area in the wake of strong pressure by Jewish groups, the police have once again opened the Temple Mount to Jewish visitors. The hours are as restricted as before, between 7:30 and 10:30 p.m. in the evening and between 12:30 and 1:30 in early afternoon. At other times, Jews continue to be forbidden to frequent the holy site. Rabbis are split over whether Jews are permitted to ascend to the site of the holy temples, the site the Torah considers to be the holiest in the world. All agree that there are areas on the Temple Mount that are forbidden for entry to those who are impure, namely everyone until the Parah Adamah, or red heifer, purification ceremony can be performed. However, some rabbis say that because the precise location of those areas is not entirely clear, and because of the fear that some Jews might not even care to find out, the entire mount area must be forbidden for public entry. Other rabbis say that following careful research and based on archaeological evidence, the forbidden areas can be mapped out and that proper Jewish legal precautions, including immersing in a ritual bath before visiting, can and must be taken to prevent errant wandering. These rabbis feel that there is an important national religious value in visiting the site and perpetuating Jewish national bonds with the site as opposed to abandoning it to the Muslims. And just to interject there, they're talking about baptism. Keeping in mind this is Judaism. And the purification ceremony and the ritual bathing is about, that was how baptism came about, how Christian baptism originated, from that ritualistic cleansing or purification bath done by the Levites. And yet it's happening today. This is not way back in the time of Moses. This is going on right now, today.
as we read this. I took this off the news yesterday morning. Continuing the monthly march around the Temple Mount gates, which is held every Rosh Chodesh on the first day of each Hebrew month, was canceled by police earlier this week at the beginning of the month of Adar. This despite or because of the fact that thousands of Jews were expected to show up. As a result, however, a large amount of public pressure has been brought to bear by MK Uri Ariel and the Temple Mount organizations. The police then permitted an alternative event this past Sunday evening. Hundreds of Jews who managed to find out of the change in plans showed up outside the southern wall of the Temple Mount. This is happening now. And imagine if the Ark of the Covenant were found. The absolute frenzy that would be set off. And the people who would build a holy place to house, they're not going to, if the Ark were found, they're not going to leave it in a pit under the Temple Mount, are they? A holy place would have to be built for it. And keeping in mind that not just anyone could touch it, according to God's law. That still applies to the Jews in their present stage of salvation. Because keeping in mind, the abomination of desolation in what God calls a holy place is talking about a Jewish place in Judea. So you see how it still applies? It doesn't apply to Christians, but it certainly is viewed because the Jews have been sort of in a place in a holding pattern, deliberately by the Lord. And we've touched upon this in other sermons and studies. And how that blindness is there for a purpose until the full number of Gentiles comes in. We've covered that in other studies and why that's there. Continuing, Kiryat Arba's chief rabbi Don Lior, chairman of the Yeshua Rabbis Council and a leading Haletic source on the Temple Mount matters, told the assembled the increase of terrorism and anti-Semitism in Israel and around the world stems from our neglect of and weakness regarding the Temple Mount. The fact that the mount is closed whenever our enemies begin threatening, and that the hours in which we may ascend are so limited that we may not pray there or build a synagogue. All this reflects weakness and lack of Jewish control over the most sacred site to the entire Jewish nation. And again, as I mentioned, there is no political will yet, but just watch what happens if something very, very, very sacred is found. How all of that will be changed. That doesn't mean the other dangers will go away, but it will simply be overshadowed by the great discovery and the great psychological effect that that's going to have. And isn't that amazing? How that's all just there. Just these three items. We don't have time for many more. There are many more that we could be here all day and all night and all tomorrow reading them, because the Bible is in the news. So isn't that amazing? How all these things are there, just waiting to come together. And they're going to. They most surely will, because oftentimes the situations will feed off of each other. They will be fueled one from the other, and they will just begin this like a whirlwind, get stronger and stronger. And it's going to happen. It's just an amazing thing. There were also the protests in Israel about the digs, the archaeological digs that are going on. I believe the Ark of the Covenant is going to be found. Everything that history tells us from the Bible indicates that it was in Jerusalem when Jerusalem was destroyed. And yet everything that is listed as being either destroyed or looted, everything right down to pots and shovels, just completely mundane things are listed, and yet something like the Ark of the Covenant is not mentioned. Why do you think that is? And, they had 18 months. The siege lasted about 18 months, in which the city of Jerusalem was totally cut off by the Babylonians. No one went in or out. So there's no way they could have gotten it out. But they could sure hide it very, very well. And everyone knows, by the way, that there are many passages underneath the Temple Mount. Every once in a while there's a little cave-in. Things happen. Perhaps it could just be found that way. With all the activity up there, there could be a cave-in that would reveal one of those old tunnel systems under there, or natural systems that are under there. And there it may be. And when that's found, it's going to demand, they're not going to leave it in a pit, are they? Are they? It's going to require a building of something. And people like the so-called Temple Mount Faithful, headed by Gershon Solomon, are ready to build it. They've got all the materials, they've got the people, they've got everything ready to go. If they had the political backing, they could begin building that Temple of Judah, or Temple of God in Judah, immediately. They know exactly what to build. The materials
Some of the materials have already been gathered, ready to go, sitting in warehouses, ready to go. So, and you see how everything would come together? The Pope traditionally has regarded Jerusalem as an international city. He viewed the people there as people who are under his wing yet, officially at least, despite history. Actually, the Pope himself has been far harder on true Christians than he has on other sorts of Christians or the people of Judah. And yet it's all there. We didn't have time to go through all of these, but we put the news links page back on where the actual news links are there, that line to the links, rather than news sources. People have made it clear that that's the way they prefer it, so it's there, and that's the reason. These very same sorts of articles in the news. That's why they're there. It's not to make some sort of political statement or something like that. It's just to have available for people in one place a number of these things to learn about and to become aware of as they're happening. And that's the only reason. And it's amazing. I got both of these actually from that page, the links that are on there. So how news is happening, how prophecy is happening in the news. And it's barely begun. Barely begun. Much of what is written in the book of Revelation is something you're going to be able to witness for yourself in the news. Maybe, if you're in that last generation. And isn't that amazing? And isn't that ominous? And isn't that wonderful at the same time? Because we know that when it all starts to happen, Christ's return is going to happen. When the two witnesses are given power to begin their ministry, we know that the return of Christ is going to occur a little over 42 months after that. That's the length of their ministry. Whether they have ministries today or not, we don't know. Whether they are just learning as of right now, we don't know. Whether they even know each other right now, we don't know. They don't probably know either. Because the history of prophets, very, very often, is that God simply revealed himself to an individual or to individuals and simply told them, this is what I want you to do. And so they went and did it. Very often. But will it be people who have no idea of the truth? That doesn't seem logical, does it? It will be people who have a very firm and strong and deep foundation in the gospel, in the true gospel of what's happening, and a very firm understanding of prophecy. It would make absolutely no sense to take someone who has no awareness and send them to do something that is in fact highly detailed in what is needed to be done and said and preached and to all nations. So they're going to have a worldview as well, because they're going to do some traveling, even though the primary focus of their ministry will be to oppose or to be a counterbalance to that beast and false prophet in Jerusalem. Ultimately, because that's what we know from prophecy, that's where they're going to be martyred, in Jerusalem. And Christ warned, when you see the abomination of desolation, get out of there. Let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. So you see, it's talking about a specific place, a specific entity, a specific event, a specific political and religious condition, something that's really going to be happening there. And so it all will come together at that point. But it's going to be a worldwide situation for everyone. The religious persecution that's coming, it's going to affect you no matter where you are. It makes no difference, because the people are going to believe that their salvation is going to be at stake, and they're going to be panicking. And when people panic, they do strange things and bad things sometimes for themselves and for others. You know, when it says that you will be killed by people who think they're doing God a service, you know, that pretty much says it all. But we are living in interesting times, and with the coming of the internet, it's getting more interesting and more aware. There can be such a thing as information overload. Like I said, at any given time now, I've got a stack of traditional paper newspapers. I think I've got 7 or 8 there now I haven't read yet. I walk out every morning and get it at the end of my driveway, but oftentimes I'll just set it there and it never gets read for a while. And one day I'll read them all. But primarily internet now is for most people. And in fact, that newspaper is available on the internet now. I don't even have to get it by paper. You can get the entire thing online. So you see where news is going to be, or already is. All of the news agencies, one of the major U.S. newspapers has said in the past week, the publisher has said that perhaps it won't even be printing 5 years from now. It'll all be internet. And why not? Makes complete sense. Environmentally, it does as well. Look at all the paper that would be saved if news was done internet. Although still, when you buy a computer nowadays, usually a printer comes along with it. Still lots of paper being sold. Certainly newspapers, if it can be done electronically, and as well the internet can be instantly changed and updated. News pages can be changed instantly, whereas a newspaper, the setup time, even with computers, is much longer. But the news isn't just the news. It isn't just something happening over there or way off somewhere, and it doesn't matter, because it doesn't matter where you are. It's going to affect you, and it's going to be a part of your life, what is coming in this Word of God, in the Word of God, in the true Word of God. And you're being aware of it ahead of time is going to help you get through it without panic. At least it's not going to be easy in terms of the persecution that is coming upon those who hold to the truth, who obey God as best they humanly can. It's not going to be easy, but at least the awareness that there is light at the end of that tunnel, that very dark tunnel, and literally a light coming, is going to make it a lot easier. And we know that the gospel will never be silenced, because when all else fails, the two witnesses are going to be given the power to proclaim to the entire world as a counterbalance to the fraud that's going to be coming out of Rome and Jerusalem by that time, by those two, by the beast and the false prophet. It's plainly described in prophecy, plainly described in the Word of God. It's all there. And more and more as time goes on, it's going to be in your daily news. So don't ignore it, because in fact it's about you. It's about your life. It's about your eternal life. And it's in the news. More and more. Thank you for joining us for services this week. As always, your being with us makes our joy complete. Until next week, when we meet again on this, God's holy Sabbath day, may the Lord bless thee and keep thee. May the Lord make his face shine upon thee and be gracious unto thee. May the Lord lift up his countenance upon thee and give thee peace. God bless you all.